I am a friend, I'm a colleague, I'm a student, I'm a teacher. Each of these roles is clear. You really don't have any kind of choices or negotiations. Say, well, I'm not interested in this type of relationship. Of course, in terms of colleagues and friends, you do have choices. But even there, no matter how you function in society, these networks help you to understand yourself. Yes?
So is there like a point that you reach where your role becomes like a really big deal, or because like while we're developing, when we're like younger,
yes.
I mean, I guess we have some kind of a role or some kind of position, I guess, but like our lives are changing and our future is like incredibly like indistinct. So what would you, I mean?
I know your question. Your question is what happened to your identity if you are continuously interacting with a dynamic process of human relationships.
Yeah.
Right?
So.
Now, role ethics will put a lot of emphasis on the fluidity of being human. And that fluidity allows them to emphasize the importance of understanding your role in a complete context, situational and self-understanding. And so, if you try to find your identity, inner identity, in a sense that cuts across the different stages of your growth and different circumstances, you're actually looking for something which is not real, which may turn out to be what you attach yourself to, or which you consider as the most essential of yourself. They will consider this essentialization is not going to work. In the postmodern period, we have this term hybridity. Each one of us assumes many different roles, and all these relationships, in fact, define ourselves. I don't subscribe to the role ethics thesis, so I do have some problems. But that's my personal view. I try to argue sympathetically the position. They consider role ethics as the Confucian answer to liberal democratic ideas, especially the Confucian critique of individualism. So role ethics is always a thick description of a person in communication with a variety of many other people. You may want to follow. Anyone else would like to follow this particular position?
So when you said they're not concerned about identity questions, you were saying people don't really have an identity.
From their point of view. Right. Yeah. From their point of view, so-called identity is, if not a fiction, it's an imagination. It's attachment to certain kinds of essence that never exists. And one of the most radical positions arguing against this inner identity, of course, is Buddhism. And the Buddhism argues there's no inner core. The Buddhist idea is that any situation you can imagine is a composite nature, all kinds of other conditions, karmic forces, shape that condition. Once these forces disappear, like you go to a banquet, you really enjoyed it, you hope it will last forever, but once the banquet ends, it disappears. That's true with everything, including yourself. Because if you combine yourself in terms of biological, sociological, psychological, political and social forces, that self you consider to be your own, which is enduring, is the form of ignorance. Because the penetrating understanding of the self is to know it's a composite nature. That's the reason there's a term called, not necessarily suffering, called a sense of impermanence. Nothing is permanent. And that we know, even in terms of a common sense notion. Since there's nothing that is permanent, if we try to attach ourselves to a certain kind of permanent self, it's a delusion. It's basically ignorance. Role ethics are very different because role ethics appreciate all relationships as real. Each one of them contributes to our self-understanding, to our role in the society. So role is given, and role at the same time changes. And there's always interaction between many different kinds of roles. But they are basic roles because they are Confucian. These are 5 relationships. These are the basic relationships, as I call it, define a person. They are constraints. These constraints can never be eliminated. So our purpose is not to transcend totally ourselves from these constraints, but to change these constraints as vehicles of self-realization. Therefore, I use this term, enabling constraints, in terms of your ethnicity, your gender, your language, your age cohort, and so forth. And it's quite persuasive, no question about it. Then in the classical tradition,